You stand at the edge of a forgotten town, Millbrook, where every whispered rumor seems to cling to the decaying facade of the old Sterling Trust Bank. Its walls, once silent witnesses to booming fortunes and the quiet exchange of wealth, now hold a deeper, more unsettling secret, a mystery that lingers in the very air you breathe. What untold stories lie hidden within that hushed, imposing structure, darker than the mere relentless march of time? Is it truly possible that, at the very heart of human greed, an unexpected innocence could lie concealed, waiting to be unearthed by the most improbable of individuals? This unsettling thought clashes sharply with the town's palpable apprehension, the uneasy glances of its residents falling upon the abandoned building, starkly contrasting with one man's unwavering belief in his own ability to claim a hidden treasure. The air inside the bank's vast echoing hall is a heavy, cloying presence, thick with the smell of forgotten mold, the musty scent of decaying paper, and the ghost of forgotten transactions. Faint twilight struggles to filter through shattered window panes, painting long, dancing shadows that stretch and sway like silent specters across the dust-laden floor, creating an almost theatrical sense of dread. The only sound breaking this oppressive silence, a deep, somber reminder of a singular, desperate purpose, is the intermittent, metallic clang as Jake Thompson moves deeper within the building. The penetrating cold of the vaults, a chill that seems to seep into your very bones, clings relentlessly to his skin, while dust motes float lazily in the dim light, appearing to hold the weight of broken dreams and forgotten lives, an atmosphere of urban decay that swallows his every furtive move. Jake Thompson, a man etched with the harsh lines of a life lived on the fringes, carries scars that mark not only his weathered skin but also his very soul. A cruel tapestry of broken promises and the crushing weight of a crippling debt have relentlessly driven him to this, his absolute last resort, an act of desperate theft. The heavy burden of past disappointments hangs over him, like a perpetual shadow, a constant, gnawing presence that propels him forward, seeking a material redemption he ironically believes his spirit craves in an entirely different, more profound way. His motivation is pure, unadulterated desperation, a raw vulnerability that hints at a spark of humanity he himself had long believed extinguished beneath layers of cynicism. His criminal instinct, honed by years of navigating the shadows, now pulses with a singular focus, entirely unaware that it is about to face an unexpected and profound moral test. Every calculated step takes him closer to the very heart of the bank, where the heavy, formidable vault door stands as a silent, imposing guardian of what he believes will be his salvation. He envisions the gleam of gold, the tangible proof of a way out of his suffocating problems, a path to escape the relentless pursuit of his past. The cold, metallic scent of the vault grows stronger, wrapping around him, a chilling promise of the illicit treasure he so desperately seeks, a future hanging precariously on the turn of a lock. With a focused intensity that silences his racing thoughts, Jake works, his movements precise and practiced, each twist of his tools a testament to his grim determination. The oppressive silence of the bank holds its breath, amplifying every minute sound, every scrape of metal against metal. Then, a distinct, almost delicate click slices through the heavy air, a sound so soft, yet so profoundly impactful it seems to reverberate through the very foundations of the building. The heavy bolt, a symbol of impenetrable security, gives way with a reluctant sigh, yielding to his persistent efforts. The moment of truth has arrived, the threshold to his imagined freedom now open. The massive vault door, a behemoth of steel and reinforced concrete, begins to swing inward, not with a triumphant rush, but with a slow, agonizing creak that seems to stretch time itself. Jake's eyes, already adjusted to the gloom, strain to catch the first glint of the expected metallic sheen, the promise of the gold that represents his escape. But instead of the anticipated shimmer of wealth, a different sound, faint and barely audible, drifts out from the impenetrable darkness within. A soft, almost imperceptible whimper reaches his ears, a sound utterly out of place. His heart, which moments before had pounded with adrenaline, suddenly seizes in his chest. A weak bark, little more than a fragile sigh, emerges from the blackness, freezing him to the spot. What on earth could possibly be hiding in the dark depths of this abandoned vault? You stand there, a silent witness, as the heavy air of the old Sterling Trust Bank, thick with the scent of forgotten mold and decaying paper, now carries a new, unsettling resonance, an almost imperceptible vibration that seems to hum against your eardrums. The faint twilight, struggling through shattered window panes, no longer merely paints long, dancing shadows across the dust-laden floor. It now feels like a spotlight, starkly illuminating the fragile tension that has suddenly descended. Millbrook, a town you know to be clinging precariously to the edge of existence, feels miles away, its whispered rumors and uneasy glances swallowed whole by the oppressive silence within these walls, leaving only the cold, metallic tang of the vault to prick at your senses. The chill, which moments ago was simply an inconvenience, now wraps around you like a shroud, tightening its grip, hinting at an unforeseen presence. This abandoned edifice, once a bastion of wealth, has become a stage where an unexpected drama is about to unfold, its secrets far more profound than any mere financial transaction. Jake Thompson, the man whose very existence has been a relentless pursuit of elusive redemption, carries the weight of a lifetime etched into his very bones, a complex tapestry woven from the threads of broken promises and the crushing reality of a crippling, inescapable debt. You see the deep lines around his eyes, not merely from age, but from countless nights spent staring into the void, haunted by the specter of past failures and the faces of those he inadvertently disappointed. His journey to this desolate vault, a desperate gamble for a future he barely dares to imagine, is the culmination of years spent navigating the treacherous fringes of society, a landscape where trust is a luxury and survival is the only currency that truly matters. He became a ghost in his own life, a shadow moving through the world, convinced that the only way to silence the gnawing emptiness within was through a tangible, material gain, a belief that had hardened his spirit over countless solitary years. The crushing burden of past disappointments, a relentless, suffocating shadow, has always propelled him forward, driving him with an almost feverish intensity towards this moment, this desperate act. He sought a material redemption, a tangible escape from the chains of his financial ruin, believing that only through wealth could his spirit find the elusive peace it so desperately craved, a peace that had eluded him for decades. This underlying desperation, a raw and exposed vulnerability, hints at a flicker of humanity he himself had long believed, extinguished, buried deep beneath layers of cynicism and the hardened shell of a life lived on the edge. He has known profound loneliness, a desolate companion in his solitary struggle, and in that isolation, the line between right and wrong had blurred, becoming a means to an end, a path to simply survive another day. His criminal instinct, honed by years of navigating the shadowy underbelly of life, now pulsed with a singular, unwavering focus, a relentless drive towards what he believed was his salvation. He was entirely unaware, however, that this deeply ingrained sense of survival, this very instinct, was about to face an unforeseen and profound moral test, one that would challenge the very core of his hardened worldview. He had envisioned the gleam of gold, the comforting weight of illicit treasure, a tangible proof of a way out of his suffocating problems, a clear path to escape the relentless pursuit of his past. The cold metallic scent of the vault, which had promised him a future free from the ever-present anxiety, now seemed to hold a different, more fragile promise, a chilling echo of the soft, barely perceptible whimper that still vibrated in the heavy air. The darkness within the vault, which moments before had been a mere absence of light, a canvas for his golden fantasies, now felt like a living entity, a heavy blanket woven from secrets and an unsettling silence that stretched and pulled at the edges of your perception. The whimper, so soft yet so profoundly out of place, seemed to hang in the air, a fragile question mark in the oppressive stillness, challenging every assumption Jake had brought into this decaying sanctuary. Dust motes, once lazy dancers in the dim light, now seemed to swirl with a frenetic energy, appearing to hold the weight of unknown possibilities, each particle a tiny witness to the unexpected turn this desperate heist had taken. The penetrating cold, which had initially been a stark reminder of his isolation, now felt imbued with an almost palpable sense of vulnerability, a chilling premonition of the fragile life that might be hidden within the shadows. His heart, which had just moments ago pounded with the thrilling rush of adrenaline, suddenly seized in his chest, a tight knot of confusion and a burgeoning, unfamiliar dread. The faint whimper, followed by that weak, almost imperceptible bark, was a sound entirely alien to his world of calculated risks and cold, hard facts. It was a sound that spoke not of gold or escape, but of something far more delicate, far more demanding, something that shattered the carefully constructed narrative of his desperate theft. You watch him, frozen in the dim light, caught between the hardened instinct to retreat from the unknown and a nascent, almost imperceptible curiosity that tugged at the edges of his long-dormant humanity. The future, which he had meticulously planned, now hung precariously, poised on the precipice of an unforeseen and life-altering choice. The beam from your flashlight, a fragile spear in the overwhelming darkness, cut through the heavy air of the vault, searching for the source of that impossibly faint whimper that had frozen Jake Thompson in his tracks. The metallic tang of cold steel, once a promising scent of illicit gain, now mingled with a faint, disturbing animal odor, a subtle shift that prickled at your senses, hinting at something profoundly out of place. The silence, which moments before had amplified every scrape of metal against metal, now felt like a suffocating blanket, pressing down on Jake, making his own heartbeat sound like a frantic drum against the oppressive quietude. You watched as his eyes, accustomed to the gloom, strained, trying to pierce the impenetrable black, a primal instinct of caution battling with a nascent, unsettling curiosity that tugged at the edges of his hardened resolve. The air, thick with the weight of unseen secrets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the revelation. Then, the light found them, two small, trembling bundles huddled together in the deepest corner, a fragile knot of skin and bones against the cold, unyielding concrete floor. Not the gleaming gold bars Jake had envisioned, not the stacks of forgotten currency, but two tiny, skeletal German Shepherd puppies, their eyes barely open, blinking weakly against the sudden intrusion of light. Their small bodies, barely more than a fragile framework, were covered in a fine layer of dust and dirt, interspersed with faint, disturbing scars, silent testaments to a cruelty that seemed entirely alien to the bank's decaying grandeur. The penetrating cold of the vault, which had previously felt like a challenge, now seemed to embrace their vulnerability, an icy shroud around their nascent lives. A wave of profound wrongness washed over Jake, a stark, visceral sensation that completely eclipsed the thrill of his intended theft. He saw their prominent ribs, starkly visible beneath their thin, matted fur, rising and falling with shallow, desperate breaths that were almost swallowed by the vast, echoing space. He heard the incessant, almost imperceptible trembling, a constant, fragile vibration that resonated not just through the cold air, but deep within his own chest, stirring a long, dormant empathy. Each detail was a silent accusation, a blow to his carefully constructed cynicism, reminding him of a world far more brutal than even his own, a world where such profound innocence could be discarded so callously, left to perish in the darkness. His mind, which had been meticulously calculating angles and escape routes, now struggled to process this utterly unexpected reality. The gold, the escape, the material redemption he had so desperately sought, vanished from his thoughts, replaced by the heartbreaking image before him. This wasn't a problem to be solved with a lockpicking kit or a getaway car. This was a living, breathing question mark, a raw wound in the heart of his desperate plan. The weight of his own past disappointments, the gnawing emptiness that had driven him to this act, now seemed trivial, almost insignificant, compared to the overwhelming, silent suffering of these two fragile creatures, abandoned in the tomb of human greed. The vault, once a symbol of impenetrable security and forgotten wealth, had transformed into something far more profound, a silent, chilling monument to an act of unimaginable cruelty. The faint whimpers, which now seemed to gain a desperate clarity, broke the profound silence, not with a plea for rescue, but with the raw, untainted voice of pure, unadulterated need. The dusty air, once thick with the ghosts of forgotten transactions, now hummed with the unspoken story of these tiny lives, a narrative far more compelling and immediate than any financial record. Jake's criminal instinct, honed by years of navigating shadows, found itself utterly disarmed, facing a challenge it was ill-equipped to meet, a moral dilemma that demanded not cunning, but a different kind of courage. As Jake knelt, his calloused hand, accustomed to the cold metal of tools and the harsh grip of desperation, slowly reached out, almost involuntarily, towards the nearest bundle of fur. And then, a moment of startling, almost divine, connection. One of the puppies, its eyes barely more than slits, stretched out a tiny, weak paw, brushing against his hand with an almost blind trust, a fragile, feather-light touch that seemed to pierce through layers of his hardened exterior. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated vulnerability, a silent plea that utterly shattered his resolve, leaving him frozen in the cold, dim light, grappling with a question that echoed through the desolate vault. Who could abandon such innocence to this fate, and what would it mean for the man who had stumbled upon their forgotten suffering? The beam from your flashlight, a fragile spear in the overwhelming darkness, cut through the heavy air of the vault, searching for the source of that impossibly faint whimper that had frozen Jake Thompson in his tracks. The metallic tang of cold steel, once a promising scent of illicit gain, now mingled with a faint, disturbing animal odor, a subtle shift that prickled at your senses, hinting at something profoundly out of place. The silence, which moments before had amplified every scrape of metal against metal, now felt like a suffocating blanket, pressing down on Jake, making his own heartbeat sound like a frantic drum against the oppressive quietude. You watched as his eyes, accustomed to the gloom, strained, trying to pierce the impenetrable black, a primal instinct of caution battling with a nascent, unsettling curiosity that tugged at the edges of his hardened resolve. The air, thick with the weight of unseen secrets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the revelation. Then the light found them, two small, trembling bundles huddled together in the deepest corner, a fragile knot of skin and bones against the cold, unyielding concrete floor. Not the gleaming gold bars Jake had envisioned, not the stacks of forgotten currency, but two tiny, skeletal German shepherd puppies, their eyes barely open, blinking weakly against the sudden intrusion of light. Their small bodies, barely more than a fragile framework, were covered in a fine layer of dust and dirt, interspersed with faint, disturbing scars, silent testaments to a cruelty that seemed entirely alien to the bank's decaying grandeur. The penetrating cold of the vault, which had previously felt like a challenge, now seemed to embrace their vulnerability, an icy shroud around their nascent lives. A wave of profound wrongness washed over Jake, a stark, visceral sensation that completely eclipsed the thrill of his intended theft. He saw their prominent ribs, starkly visible beneath their thin, matted fur, rising and falling with shallow, desperate breaths that were almost swallowed by the vast, echoing space. He heard the incessant, almost imperceptible trembling, a constant, fragile vibration that resonated not just through the cold air, but deep within his own chest, stirring a long-dormant empathy. Each detail was a silent accusation, a blow to his carefully constructed cynicism, reminding him of a world far more brutal than even his own, a world where such profound innocence could be discarded so callously, left to perish in the darkness. His mind, which had been meticulously calculating angles and escape routes, now struggled to process this utterly unexpected reality. The gold, the escape, the material redemption he had so desperately sought, vanished from his thoughts, replaced by the heartbreaking image before him. This wasn't a problem to be solved with a lock-picking kit or a getaway car. This was a living, breathing question mark, a raw wound in the heart of his desperate plan. The weight of his own past disappointments, the gnawing emptiness that had driven him to this act, now seemed trivial, almost insignificant, compared to the overwhelming, silent suffering of these two fragile creatures, abandoned in the tomb of human greed. The vault, once a symbol of impenetrable security and forgotten wealth, had transformed into something far more profound, a silent, chilling monument to an act of unimaginable cruelty. The faint whimpers, which now seemed to gain a desperate clarity, broke the profound silence not with a plea for rescue, but with the raw, untainted voice of pure, unadulterated need. The dusty air, once thick with the ghosts of forgotten transactions, now hummed with the unspoken story of these tiny lives, a narrative far more compelling and immediate than any financial record. Jake's criminal instinct, honed by years of navigating shadows, found itself utterly disarmed, facing a challenge it was ill-equipped to meet, a moral dilemma that demanded not cunning, but a different kind of courage. As Jake knelt, his calloused hand, accustomed to the cold metal of tools and the harsh grip of desperation, slowly reached out, almost involuntarily, towards the nearest bundle of fur, and then, a moment of startling, almost divine, connection. One of the puppies, its eyes barely more than slits, stretched out a tiny, weak paw, brushing against his hand with an almost blind trust, a fragile, feather-light touch that seemed to pierce through layers of his hardened exterior. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated vulnerability, a silent plea that utterly shattered his resolve, leaving him frozen in the cold, dim light, grappling with a question that echoed through the desolate vault. Who could abandon such innocence to this fate? And what would it mean for the man who had stumbled upon their forgotten suffering? Jake's vision, once fixated on the imagined gleam of gold, now sharpened to the stark reality of their suffering, a chilling tableau illuminated by his trembling flashlight beam. You observed him, his eyes tracing the gaunt lines of their ribs, each shallow breath a testament to their fading strength, a fragile rhythm against the profound silence of the vault. He noticed the empty, dry dish, a cruel mockery of sustenance, and a frayed, thin blanket, offering little comfort against the relentless chill that seemed to seep from the very concrete. The metallic tang of the vault still lingered, but now it was overshadowed by the faint, desperate scent of starving life, a smell that clawed at his conscience, pulling him deeper into their silent tragedy, and raising a chilling question. How long had this slow, agonizing decay been their only reality? The weight of the cold pressed in, a physical manifestation of their abandonment, a cruel chain binding them to this forgotten tomb. Jake's hand, still tingling from the puppy's touch, found itself hovering over their fragile forms, a stark contrast to the rough implements of his trade that lay discarded nearby. He felt a profound shift within him, a flicker of warmth, like a dying ember catching an unexpected breath of air, attempting to ignite against the pervasive cold of his own hardened heart. The darkness of the vault, which had promised him a hidden fortune, now revealed a far more profound secret, one that whispered of a human cruelty he hadn't anticipated, pushing his own desperate act into a stark, unsettling perspective. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken stories of their quiet endurance, but what other signs of their suffering remained hidden in the shadows? As his eyes adjusted further, a small, grimy detail caught his attention near the tattered blanket, a faded, half-eaten dog biscuit, hard as stone, long past its prime, yet a poignant symbol of a fleeting, perhaps last, act of care before their cruel abandonment. It hinted at a moment of haste, a sudden departure, leaving behind these defenseless creatures to face the slow, relentless march of starvation and cold. The wind outside, a low, mournful sigh against the shattered windows, seemed to carry a distant, almost imperceptible whisper, a phantom siren reminding him of the precariousness of his own position, yet his thoughts remained chained to the two tiny lives before him. A new, more profound fear began to coil in his gut, not for himself, but for them, for the dwindling flame of life within their small bodies. Yet what other secrets would this forgotten detail betray? He moved slowly, his own movements now infused with a careful gentleness, his calloused fingers brushing against the cold steel of his lock-picking tools, now feeling utterly alien. He carefully removed his worn, heavy jacket, a familiar shield against the world's harshness, and gently draped it over the shivering puppies, a small ember of warmth against the vast, cold snow of their abandonment. It was a simple act, yet it felt monumental, a silent promise made in the desolate quiet of the vault, a shift from taking to giving. The faint twilight filtering through the high windows, once a mere backdrop, now seemed to cast long, accusatory shadows, highlighting the stark contrast between his original intent and this unexpected, profound obligation. Yet, a chilling thought pricked at the edges of his mind. What if he was already too late, and this small comfort was merely a futile gesture against an unstoppable tide? Suddenly, a distinct, rhythmic creak echoed from the far end of the vast bank hall, a sound utterly out of place, shattering the oppressive silence that had become his accomplice. Jake froze, his heart leaping into his throat, the metallic taste of fear sharp on his tongue. Was it the wind, a trick of the decaying structure, or something far more sinister? His mind, momentarily pulled from the puppy's plight, raced through escape scenarios, his criminal instincts flaring, a brief, desperate fire against the encroaching darkness of his moral dilemma. The silence of the bank, once a cover, now felt like a fragile glass, ready to shatter at any moment, exposing him and his unexpected cargo to unseen dangers. The choice, stark and unforgiving, now pressed down on him, demanding an answer. But what would he sacrifice to protect these tiny, fragile lives? His gaze returned to the puppies, their small forms barely visible beneath his jacket, their weak whimpers, a direct challenge to his hardened resolve. The gold, the escape, the life he had meticulously planned to steal, now seemed utterly meaningless, a hollow promise compared to the raw, undeniable need before him. The metaphorical chains of his past, of debt and desperation, felt like they were finally breaking, not by a force of his own will, but by the sheer, overwhelming innocence of these abandoned creatures. A spark of compassion, a small fire against the encroaching darkness of his own soul, ignited, burning away the last vestiges of his criminal intent. He would save them, no matter the cost, no matter the risk, but the path out of this forgotten tomb, with its fragile, living secrets, was fraught with unseen perils. The truth, when it finally dawned on Jake, was a brutal, icy shock, far more chilling than the penetrating cold of the vault itself. You watched as his hardened gaze, once fixed on the promise of illicit gold, now saw only the stark, undeniable evidence of a crime far more heinous than his own desperate theft. These tiny, trembling forms, barely clinging to life, were not merely forgotten. They were abandoned, intentionally left to perish, sealed within this steel tomb. The empty dish, the meager blanket, the very silence that had swallowed their desperate whimpers, all spoke of a calculated cruelty that dwarfed his own material desperation. His pursuit of stolen wealth, the chains of debt that had bound him, suddenly felt like a flimsy excuse, a mere shadow compared to the overwhelming, tangible suffering before him. This wasn't just neglect, it was a deliberate act of profound heartlessness, and the realization hit him like a physical blow, demanding an immediate, visceral response from a soul he thought long dead. What kind of monster would commit such an act, and then simply walk away, leaving these innocents to face the slow, agonizing march of death? As Jake's eyes, now cleared of their self-serving haze, scanned the immediate surroundings of the puppies, A small, almost imperceptible detail caught his attention near the back wall of the vault. Tucked behind a rusted metal shelf, a crude handwritten note lay half buried in the dust, its faded ink barely legible under the struggling flashlight beam. You observed him carefully pick it up, his calloused fingers trembling slightly as he deciphered the hurried, almost defiant scrawl. It confirmed his darkest fear. Can't keep 'em. Too much trouble. Vault's secure. The words, blunt and devoid of remorse, were a chilling testament to the callous indifference that had condemned these fragile lives. The air in the vault, already heavy with the scent of decay, now seemed to press down with the suffocating weight of human cruelty, making his own intended crime seem almost trivial, a desperate act by comparison, rather than a malicious one. The pervasive cold felt like a tangible representation of the heart that had penned those damning words, sealing their fate. The silence that followed was not just an absence of sound, but a profound accusation, echoing a question: how could anyone be so utterly devoid of compassion? A fierce, protective instinct, one he hadn't known still existed within him, suddenly flared to life in Jake's chest, a small but potent fire against the pervasive cold of his self-imposed isolation. The gold, the escape, the life he had so meticulously planned to steal, all of it vanished, replaced by an overwhelming singular purpose. You could see the shift in his posture, the hardening of his jaw, as he made a silent, unshakable vow. He would save them. This was no longer about his redemption through ill-gotten gains, but about a far deeper, more profound form of salvation, a desperate attempt to mend a piece of his own fractured soul by protecting these utterly defenseless creatures. The weight of his own past, the bitter taste of his failures, still lingered, but for the first time in years it felt less like a burden, and more like a catalyst for an entirely new path. The air, thick with the scent of mold and forgotten dreams, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of hope, a fragile promise in the heart of despair. But how would he get them out of this fortress, unnoticed and unharmed, with the world outside still a threat? With a newfound gentleness that felt alien to his rough, calloused hands, Jake carefully gathered the two tiny puppies, their small bodies barely registering weight against his arm. You watched him meticulously wrap them in his worn, heavy jacket, the fabric a familiar shield against the harshness of the world, now repurposed as a cradle of warmth for these fragile lives. Their weak whimpers, once sounds of desperate need, now seemed to soften, almost settling into a fragile sense of security against his chest. The metallic clang of his discarded tools, lying forgotten on the vault floor, seemed to mock his previous intentions, starkly contrasting with the soft, living warmth now nestled in his arms. The penetrating cold of the vault, which had seeped into his bones, now felt less oppressive, challenged by the small, insistent heat emanating from the bundles. This was his new treasure, infinitely more valuable than any gold, and the path forward, though fraught with danger, felt clearer than any he had ever envisioned. Yet, the shadows outside the vault still stretched long and menacing, promising untold perils beyond this immediate, fragile sanctuary. Each step Jake took away from the opened vault, carrying his precious shivering cargo, felt like an immense gamble against an unseen foe. You could hear the almost imperceptible creak of the aging floorboards beneath his weight, amplified by the oppressive silence of the vast bank hall, each sound a potential betrayer in the gloom. The faint twilight filtering through the shattered window panes which had once seemed distant, now appeared closer, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and swayed like silent specters, making every corner a potential hiding place for an unknown threat. The cold metallic scent of the bank, once a stark reminder of his isolation, now seemed to cling to him with a new intensity, a chilling premonition of the dangers that lay ahead. His heart pounded, a frantic drum against his ribs, not with the adrenaline of a thief, but with the fierce protective rhythm of a guardian. The weight of the puppies, though slight, felt monumental, grounding him, yet also making him agonizingly aware of his vulnerability. The path to freedom, illuminated only by the fragile light of his resolve, was fraught with uncertainty. But a new, more immediate sound suddenly pricked at the heavy air, demanding his attention. As Jake moved cautiously towards the bank's grand decaying entrance, a distinct rhythmic thudding began to resonate from somewhere beyond the main hall, growing steadily louder, more insistent. It wasn't the wind, nor the settling groans of the old building. This was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching with an unnerving purpose. You watched as his head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, the warmth of the puppies against his chest, a stark reminder of the stakes, the metaphorical chains of his past, the burden of his own desperate actions, had dissolved, replaced by the very real, very present danger of discovery. The silence of the abandoned bank, his former accomplice, had been shattered, revealing him and his fragile cargo to the encroaching threat. Every instinct screamed for him to hide, to abandon his new purpose, but the soft, trusting whimpers from beneath his jacket solidified his resolve. The confrontation was no longer a distant possibility. It was a rapidly approaching reality, and the choice he had made, to save these innocent lives, now propelled him directly into the jaws of an unknown immediate danger. The rhythmic thudding intensified, each heavy beat echoing through the cavernous bank hall, a relentless drumbeat against Jake's racing heart. You felt the subtle shift in the air, a ripple of unease as the sound grew from a distant murmur to a palpable presence, closing in with an unnerving precision that stole the very breath from your lungs. He clutched the precious bundles of fur closer, their tiny bodies, a fragile warmth against his chest, a stark contrast to the icy dread that now coiled in his gut. The faint twilight through the shattered windows, once a guide, now seemed to betray him, casting long, dancing shadows that offered no true concealment, only fleeting illusions. Every creak of the ancient floorboards beneath his cautious steps felt amplified, a thunderous announcement of his presence in the oppressive silence, threatening to expose his desperate, tender mission. His escape, once a clear path, now felt like navigating a treacherous maze, with an unseen pursuer at his heels, and the fragile lives in his arms depending entirely on his next move. What unseen eyes were now watching his every desperate, fumbling step? A gruff voice, deep and laced with a weary authority, sliced through the heavy air, demanding, "Who's there? Show yourself!" The words, sharp as broken glass, ricocheted off the high ceilings, shattering any remaining pretense of secrecy. Jake pressed himself against the cold, grimy wall, the rough brick scraping against his jacket, a futile attempt to merge with the decay around him. The puppies, sensing his rising panic, stirred, their weak whimpers a terrifyingly audible counterpoint to the intruder's booming command. He could smell the stale scent of old coffee and cheap tobacco, a human presence far too close for comfort, signaling an imminent confrontation that his hardened instincts usually relished, but now dreaded. His mind screamed for an escape route, any shadow, any crack in the fading light, but the bank offered only vast, open spaces, leaving him exposed, his only shield the fragile hope he clutched to his chest. How much longer could he remain hidden, with an unknown adversary just around the corner and innocent lives at stake? Suddenly, a figure materialized from the gloom at the far end of the hall, a bulky silhouette framed by the faint dust-laden light filtering from the entrance. He was a man of imposing stature, clad in a worn security guard uniform, his face etched with a mixture of suspicion and profound exhaustion, a heavy-duty flashlight clutched in his gloved hand. The beam, a blinding white spear, cut through the darkness, sweeping across the vast, empty space, momentarily catching Jake in its relentless glare. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with unspoken accusation, as their eyes locked across the desolate expanse of the bank. Jake instinctively tightened his grip on the puppies, their small, vulnerable forms, now his entire world, his body tensing, ready to shield them from any perceived threat. His breath caught in his throat, a raw, primal fear bubbling up, not for himself, but for the fragile lives he held, knowing this encounter could end everything. The guard took another deliberate step forward, his presence filling the echoing hall with an undeniable authority. But would he understand the desperate truth hidden beneath Jake's rough exterior? "What do you think you're doing in here?" The guard's voice boomed, laced with an unmistakable threat, the flashlight beam unwavering, pinning Jake against the crumbling wall. "This building is condemned, private property. I'm calling the police." Jake's mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate possibilities, each one more perilous than the last. He could try to bolt, but with the puppies he was slow, vulnerable. He could try to explain, but what thief, caught in the act, ever told the truth? The metallic tang of fear was sharp in his mouth, mingling with the musty scent of decay, a bitter cocktail of regret and burgeoning resolve. He saw the guard's hand reaching for his radio, a silent countdown to certain capture, to the end of his freedom, and more tragically, to the end of the puppies' last hope. The warmth of their bodies against his skin felt like a burning brand, a constant, urgent reminder of his new, profound responsibility, demanding a choice, a desperate gamble against overwhelming odds. What words, what actions, could possibly sway this man, a guardian of the law, from his duty? Just as the guard's fingers brushed the radio, a small, insistent whimper, louder than any before, escaped from beneath Jake's jacket, followed by a barely audible cough. The guard froze, his hand dropping, his brow furrowing in confusion, his gaze dropping to the suspicious bulge against Jake's chest. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice now tinged with something other than just suspicion, a flicker of bewilderment. Jake knew his time was up, the truth refusing to stay hidden. With a sigh that carried the weight of 1,000 desperate nights, he slowly unzipped his jacket, revealing the two tiny, shivering forms nestled within. The flashlight beam, momentarily held steady, illuminated their fragile faces, their wide, innocent eyes blinking weakly against the sudden light, a silent, heartbreaking plea. The metallic scent of the vault and the musty air of the bank seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the guard's reaction, for the judgment that would seal all their fates. Would this hardened man, accustomed to the city's harsh realities, see only a thief, or something far more profound? The guard's eyes, which moments before had burned with suspicion, softened almost imperceptibly as they fell upon the emaciated puppies, a flicker of something akin to shock, then a profound sadness, washing over his weary face. He lowered his flashlight, the beam now pointing vaguely towards the dusty floor, his radio forgotten, his posture losing its rigid authority. The vast, echoing hall, once a stage for their tense standoff, now seemed to shrink, holding only the fragile silence and the unspoken weight of the puppies, suffering. Jake stood there, exposed, vulnerable, no longer a thief, but a desperate protector, his own fate now intertwined with these innocent lives, the gold and his former intentions utterly meaningless. The guard's lips parted, a deep breath escaping him, and for a terrifying second, Jake braced himself for an arrest, for condemnation, for the inevitable end of this fleeting hope. But the words that emerged were not what he expected, leaving him frozen in a new kind of suspense, a question hanging heavy in the air, a path diverging in ways he never imagined possible. The guard's initial shock morphed into a profound understanding, his stern facade crumbling under the weight of the puppy's fragile existence. He didn't reach for his radio again, didn't utter a single word of accusation, his eyes, now devoid of suspicion, instead mirroring the deep sorrow Jake felt for these abandoned creatures. You watched as he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken truth, and with a surprising gentleness gestured towards the bank's main exit, a clear path suddenly opening in the oppressive gloom. The metallic tang of fear in Jake's mouth slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative sense of relief, a fragile warmth spreading through him like the first rays of dawn after a long, cold night. The vast echoing hall, which moments ago had been a prison, now felt like a corridor to an unexpected freedom, but the journey outside still held its own unspoken perils. and the vulnerability of his tiny cargo remained paramount in his mind. With the guard's silent blessing, Jake moved swiftly, each step away from the decaying bank, a deliberate act of defiance against his past, a determined stride towards an unknown future. The biting cold of the Millbrook night, once a familiar enemy, now felt less harsh, its sharp edges softened by the small, insistent warmth of the puppies nestled against his chest. You could see the subtle shift in his posture, the tension in his shoulders easing, replaced by a protective resolve that radiated from him, like a faint, steady light. The whispered rumors of the town, which had once seemed to cling to the abandoned building like clinging vines, now seemed to fade into the background, drowned out by the quiet, hopeful rhythm of his own beating heart. He walked through the silent, snow-dusted streets, the moonlight, a soft, ethereal glow on the untouched white, his focus unwavering, his mission clear, but the weight of his anonymity, and the sheer challenge of finding help, still pressed heavily upon him in the enveloping quietude. The animal shelter, a beacon of soft, warm light in the otherwise dark night, emerged from the surrounding shadows like a promise fulfilled. You watched Jake hesitate for a moment at the entrance, a flicker of his old self-doubt, his criminal past threatening to resurface, to make him retreat into the familiar anonymity of the night. But the faint whimpers from beneath his jacket, a renewed plea for life, solidified his resolve, pushing him forward. He pushed open the heavy door, the scent of antiseptic and warm fur, a stark contrast to the mold and decay of the bank, a comforting embrace that promised safety. Kind, weary faces of volunteers greeted him, their eyes, accustomed to seeing desperation and need, widened slightly at the sight of the two tiny bundles he held so carefully. The silence of his secretive arrival was broken only by the soft murmur of their concern, a compassionate sound that melted away the last vestiges of his fear. But the true test of his transformation still lay ahead, in the quiet exchange of trust. As he gently placed the puppies into the waiting, capable hands of a woman with a comforting smile, a profound sense of release washed over Jake, like a heavy, unseen burden finally lifting from his shoulders. He watched, mesmerized, as she cooed softly, expertly assessing their fragile condition, her touch gentle and knowing. One of the tiny German shepherds, its eyes still barely open, stirred, and with an astonishing, almost conscious effort, stretched its small, weak head towards him. You saw its pink tongue, impossibly small, extend and deliver a feather-light lick to his rough, calloused hand, a gesture of pure, untainted gratitude that transcended language, bypassing all his defenses. It was a moment of startling clarity, a silent, intimate victory that resonated deeper than any medal, any public acclaim, burning away the last icy remnants of his past, leaving behind a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a warmth that promised a new beginning, a profound and unexpected peace. In that fleeting tender moment, as the puppy's lick lingered on his skin, Jake Thompson understood. The chains of his past, the crushing debt, the gnawing emptiness that had driven him to desperate acts, all of it seemed to dissolve, melting away like snow under the fierce, unexpected warmth of compassion. His spirit, once shrouded in the perpetual darkness of cynicism and self-interest, now felt a flicker of light, a fragile ember reigniting into a steady flame. He had come seeking a material treasure, gold and escape, but he had found something immeasurably more valuable: the profound, transformative power of saving a life, of choosing kindness over greed. The silence that had followed him for so long, a desolate companion, now shifted, becoming a quiet internal peace, a testament to the mending of his own fractured soul, proving that the true riches lay not in what he took, but in what he gave, a realization that changed everything, setting him on a path he never knew existed. He left the shelter as anonymously as he arrived, the night air still crisp, but now carrying a different promise, a nascent hope that hummed beneath the fading sounds of the city. The ghost of the puppy's lick remained on his hand, a tangible reminder of the profound shift within him, a silent vow to himself. He had no gold, no escape from his legal predicaments, but he carried a treasure far more precious, a heart rekindled, a purpose redefined. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, yet he walked with a lighter step, the weight of his past no longer crushing him, but propelling him towards a future he was now willing to build with integrity. The memory of their small, innocent faces, nestled in his jacket, was a beacon, guiding him through the encroaching dawn, but a lingering question remained, a shadow clinging to the edges of his newfound peace. What justice, if any, awaited the monster who had condemned such pure innocence to a slow and agonizing death in the dark silence of that forgotten vault? You stand at the threshold of Jake Thompson's transformation, witnessing not merely the end of his desperate journey into the forgotten bank, but the profound beginning of a new chapter, one written not in stolen gold but in the quiet, insistent warmth of compassion. Remember the initial whispers of Millbrook, the uneasy glances cast upon that decaying edifice, wondering if innocence could truly hide at the heart of human greed. You saw Jake, driven by the crushing weight of debt and a soul scarred by broken promises, believe his salvation lay within that cold vault, unaware his criminal instinct was about to face its most profound moral test. Now, as the ghost of a puppy's lick lingers on his calloused hand, you know the true treasure he unearthed was far more valuable than any material wealth, a truth that echoes through the quiet streets, reshaping the very definition of redemption for a man who thought his spirit was forever lost to the shadows. This is the story that asks you to look deeper, beyond the surface of despair, to consider the unexpected flickers of light that can ignite in the darkest corners of the human heart. Jake's journey, one born of desperation, became a testament to the enduring power of a single act of kindness, a choice that shattered the metaphorical chains of his past and forged a new path. The oppressive silence of the bank, once thick with the scent of forgotten transactions and decaying paper, was ultimately broken, not by the metallic clang of a thief's tools, but by the fragile whimpers of abandoned life, a sound that pierced through layers of cynicism and awakened a long-dormant empathy. You witnessed how the penetrating cold of the vault, which sought to embrace those innocent lives, was ultimately vanquished by the warmth of a man's rediscovered humanity, proving that even in the bleakest landscapes, hope can find a way to bloom. The narrative arc of Jake Thompson, a man etched with the harsh lines of a life lived on the fringes, finds its poignant completion not in escape or material gain, but in the simple, profound act of giving. His initial quest for a material redemption, a tangible way out of his suffocating problems, dissolved when faced with a suffering far greater than his own. The pervasive cold that had clung to his skin throughout his desperate heist now feels like a distant memory, replaced by an internal warmth, a steady fire against the encroaching darkness of his past. The scars on his soul, once a cruel tapestry of broken promises, are now slowly mending, stitched together by the threads of selflessness and a newfound purpose. You watched him shed the skin of a thief, embracing the mantle of a protector, proving that even a life seemingly beyond saving can find its way back to the light, guided by the most improbable of compasses. What does this story whisper directly to your heart? It speaks of the universal truth that transformation often arrives not in grand pronouncements or meticulously planned schemes, but in the quiet, unexpected moments where empathy demands a choice. The initial dilemma of hidden innocence at the core of human greed found its symbolic resolution in Jake's decision to save those fragile lives, transforming his act of theft into an act of salvation. You saw the physical chains of his debt and the psychological chains of his past begin to break, not through the acquisition of wealth, but through the profound act of giving, of choosing life over illicit gain. It is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person is not found in what they accumulate, but in the compassion they extend, even when it demands sacrificing their own self-interest, even when the path ahead remains shrouded in uncertainty. The old Sterling Trust Bank still stands in Millbrook, its decaying facade a silent witness to time's relentless march, but its whispered rumors now carry a different weight. It is no longer just a symbol of forgotten fortunes and urban decay. It has become a monument to an unforeseen convergence of desperation and innocence, a place where a hardened heart rediscovered its capacity for love. The faint twilight filtering through shattered window panes, which once painted shadows of dread, now seems to illuminate a path towards a deeper understanding of what truly matters. You have walked with Jake through that oppressive silence, felt the penetrating cold, and witnessed the moment his world irrevocably shifted, proving that even in the most desolate of places, a single spark of humanity can ignite a fire that burns away the darkness, leaving behind a beacon of hope for all who dare to look. So, as Jake Thompson walks away from the shadows of his past, carrying only the indelible memory of a puppy's trusting lick, his story leaves you with a simple, yet profound, message. True treasure is not found in the gleam of gold or the promise of escape, but in the selfless act of protecting the vulnerable, in the quiet courage to choose compassion over greed. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find redemption in the most unexpected places, proving that even a soul weighed down by years of disappointment can be rekindled by the purest form of innocence. You have journeyed through the darkness with him, and now, as the encroaching dawn promises a new day, you understand that the most valuable things in life are never stolen. They are earned, not with cunning, but with the boundless, transformative power of a truly compassionate heart.